So obviously there's been so many new players coming to Battlefront 2 over the last month or two with the whole Battlefront 2 resurgence that is going on, and with how deep and detailed this game is, there's actually quite a lot to miss out on if you're not paying close attention, especially for those who are new. And so today we're going to take a look at 20 crazy details you might have missed in Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now the first one, which is one of my own favorite details in this game, is the fact that both Anakin and Vader, albeit it is essentially the same character, they've actually got pretty much identical movesets in this game when it comes to their lightsaber attacks. Now, obviously they do have some very slight differences there. The animations themselves technically are different, and Vader is also known mostly for fighting with one hand, but for the most part, their moves are almost identical to each other, and I think that is a really cool touch from the developers, seeing as, like I said, obviously this is technically the same character, so it makes sense for the moveset to be pretty much identical. Now, another cool little fact that a lot of you guys may not know is that there are certain clone skins in this game that were actually made canon from Battlefront 2, having never been seen before they actually arrived in this game. Now, these clone skins you can see here, all of these were actually put into the game for the first time. They were not in any previous media, and they were not canon before Battlefront 2. When they were added to the game, though, they then became canon, and you can even now get Funko Pops and even some Black Series figures with these skins on them, which is an awesome touch. The fact that the developers put some skins in here that are now making their way to other areas of Star Wars. Now, another cool detail is that you can actually find a Sarlacc on Felucia down towards the bottom of the map. Now, it looks like this is just a lake, and if you're busy playing the game and playing the objective, you're probably not going to notice this, but if you take a closer look, at the bottom of the lake, there is actually a dead Sarlacc. Now, this is a pretty big deal when the map first came out, so I think a lot, if not all of the OG players probably know this, but this is one that a lot of you newer guys may have actually missed out on. Now, something else that is really cool to see is that there are some exact locations on Yavin 4 that we see in both A New Hope and Andor. Now, this first one here, this is actually the exact area where we see them explaining the Death Star plans in A New Hope, and then pretty much right behind that you can find this other area next to it, and this is where we see multiple discussions from Rebellion leaders, both in Rogue One as well as in the final episodes of Andor. So it's cool to see just how authentic the Rebel base is here on Yavin 4. Now, another cool little fact is the fact that Grievous uses Anakin and Obi-Wan's sabers in this game, at least the hilts anyway, and this actually initially had a little bit of drama around it. A lot of people thought that this was just EA and DICE being lazy, because obviously we know that Grievous doesn't use Anakin and Obi-Wan's sabers, but no, that is actually incorrect. In Revenge of the Sith, he is actually using, in this scene here, both Anakin and Obi-Wan's sabers. The thing is, Anakin's saber is green, and so there's a lot of speculation what went wrong here, whether this is just an Easter egg from Lucasfilm or if they themselves got lazy. In the visual guide, it says otherwise in terms of these sabers that Grievous has collected, and it pretty much confirms these are not actually Obi-Wan and Anakin sabers, but I thought it was a cool touch there from DICE to actually look at the movie, notice he was using those two sabers, and then put that into the game as well. Now, something that is very rare in this game, I've really only ever seen it happen maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 times in the however many years I've been playing this game. But if you're playing as Yoda and you block incoming lightning damage, this works from both Dooku and from Palpatine. If you absorb that damage and then fire it back at the enemy, just like we see in Attack of the Clones, he will fire that lightning back, which is an awesome touch. Now, this realistically only really works with Dooku. It does work with Palpatine, but it's kind of bugged and doesn't really work as cleanly. So it does make it pretty rare to see in this game. It's not something you're going to see all that often, but when you do see it, it looks absolutely sick, and it is yet again an awesome touch from the developers. Now, something else that shows DICE's attention to detail, and this is once again to do with the details around the lightsabers, is that the lightsabers in this game are actually very much authentic to their eras. Now, in the original trilogy, when you watch the movies, you'll see that the lightsabers are kind of rounded at the end, whereas in the Clone Wars era, both in the actual prequels as well as in the Clone Wars, and then also in the sequel era, you can see that sabers have more pointy tips to them, and so there are some slight changes between them in all of the movies, but in the game they're actually all the same as they are in each of those eras. So as you can see, Vader and Luke's saber, for example, they are very much rounded at the top, whereas some of the Clone Wars characters and stuff, they all have a pointy tip, and it again shows the absolute attention to detail from DICE. Now, something else I actually only realized recently is that in the Boo's Capital Supremacy version of the map, you can actually see the remnants of a galactic assault round, because the pillars in front of the palace are actually broken down. This is pretty much a nod to what happens in the Galactic Assault version of the map, where if the Separatists make it that far up the map, they will obviously blow up those pillars. And so it's cool to see that they've actually put that in there, and it shows that even though the maps technically aren't canon in terms of the story that happens, there is still some storytelling involved in each of these maps. Now, another cool fact about these maps is that each map actually has its own unique wildlife that runs around the map. And again, this shows how much detail is put into the game. For example, the fact that they actually have Ewoks on Endor running around and stuff, it might not seem that big of a deal because right now, obviously we have Ewoks in the game, but for those who weren't playing at launch, there were no playable Ewoks. They were only added about 2 years after launch in terms of in all of the main modes, and even the Ewok Hunt game mode wasn't added within the first 6 or so months of launch. And so the fact that they had Ewoks running around on Endor before they were even in the game, the fact that they made all of those assets not just for the Ewoks but for all of the other wildlife, again, it just very much highlights their attention to detail. Now, a cool little sort of Easter egg that you can find on the outskirts of Mos Eisley on Tatooine is that you can actually see Padme's ship here on the outskirts of the map. Now, you can also find a few other familiar ships around the place on Tatooine, and I wanted to see how many of you guys have been paying attention. So I want you guys to let me know in the comments what other ships can be found on Tatooine. I'll be paying very close attention to see who actually gets that answer right. Now, that's 10 crazy details about Star Wars Battlefront 2 so far. Before we get into the next 10, if you guys are new to the channel and you're interested in more Battlefront 2 content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. There is plenty more on the way, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, something else that I think a lot of people will probably know, this is something that I think a lot of the OG players will know, but for any new players, you might not know this. Boba Fett actually has a melee attack that is a flamethrower. Now, in some of the previous Battlefront games, especially the old ones, he did have the ability to properly use his flamethrower, but despite the fact that they removed it in this game as an actual weapon or ability, you can still use it, as you can see, when you use his melee attack. Now, something else I'm sure a lot of you guys will know is that Mark Hamill, just in the lead up to Empire Strikes Back, was in a pretty bad car crash, and he actually had to have borderline a facial reconstruction. He had to get pretty much an entire new nose in terms of the shape, and obviously his face changed quite a bit between Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope. Now, a lot of people say that they did the Wampa attack in Empire Strikes Back to actually explain his new scars, but a cool touch is that in Battlefront 2, you can even see they have removed the scar on his farm boy skin, because obviously this was prior to him having those scars at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. Now, this is another one that I actually only found out pretty recently myself as well. The CR-90, which is the rebel ship that you pretty much spawn in at the beginning of the Galactic Assault round when you're playing as the rebels on the Death Star 2. This is the ship that you spawn in and you run out of onto the Death Star. Obviously, the story behind that is that it's crashed into the Death Star and you and the rebels just have to escape and essentially try and win the battle on the Death Star. Now, something that is really cool though is that in the Starfighter assault map with the Death Star ruins, you can actually find this crashed rebel ship still attached to the place that it crashed in the Death Star even after the explosion. So that is a really cool touch. That is something I literally only found out about a month or so ago, as I'll be completely honest, I'm not that much of a Starfighter assault player. Now, another cool detail related to Darth Vader in this game is that his breathing actually changes quite a bit throughout each match, and it can come down to two different things that cause this to happen. Now, firstly, simply just running will actually make his breathing change. Obviously, he becomes out of breath, and he will start breathing with that iconic Darth Vader respirator a lot faster when you've been sprinting for quite some time. But something else that you guys may not have noticed, because generally when you're in this situation, you're probably kind of shitting yourself because it means you're on low health and you're probably about to die. But when you become very damaged as Darth Vader, he will actually have a different sound from his respirator that comes from a few different pieces of media, most notably in Star Wars Rebels, where you can hear the damaged sound of Darth Vader's respirator. Now, back on Tatooine, an Easter egg that is pretty easy to miss, albeit it's not that hard to find, is that if you head into the Mos Eisley Cantina and you head over to this corner here, you can actually find a button where you can start a hologram of the Cantina band that will then play inside of the cantina. I remember when this dropped and everyone sort of found out about this in the days when the game was still being supported, and still to this day I think this is a really cool little Easter egg. Now as for another Easter egg, and this one is probably one of my favorites in the game, on Starkiller Base, if you run over to this area of the map and you look through this little viewport, you can actually see Snoke's projection room, where we see Kylo and Hux talking to him in episode 7 when he's obviously on the projector, the sort of hollow projector that makes him absolutely massive. Now I can't be the only dumbass that in the trailers for that movie thought that that was not a hologram, and I thought that was actually how big the dude was. If that was also you, be sure to leave a comment and let me know that I'm not alone there. But I thought that was a really cool little Easter egg that is honestly very, very easy to miss on Starkiller Base. Now, one of the best missions in the entire campaign, and to be honest, this is one of my favorite moments of Luke Skywalker in general. There is essentially a whole mission in the campaign that is about Luke searching for the Emperor's hidden vaults that are hidden around the galaxy. And in the one that he finds here on Pilio, he actually finds a compass that helps with navigating areas in the unknown regions. Now, we never really see it used or anything like that, but a cool little touch is that we do actually see this in The Last Jedi, albeit it is very briefly, but I thought that was a really cool touch, something that originated in Battlefront 2 actually made its way into the movie, and personally I love when little nods like that happen within Star Wars. Now the next one is honestly a bit of a tearjerker, because this one still reminds me of the day that this game was cancelled, but there is a really cool Easter egg you can find on Takodana that was actually put into the game in that final update to give us as the players a bit of a send-off, and also it was there to unlock one of Rey's skins. Now, in this room you can find on Takodana, and you've got to do a whole ass Easter egg to get here. You can find this image, and it actually shows most of the developers who were still working on the game at that time. This is what's referred to as the skeleton crew that was working on Battlefront 2, and I still remember the day I found this. It was pretty much the day of the final update, or one of the final updates anyway, and it's fair to say every time I see this image, it does hit me right in the feels. Now, the last two that we have here are actually to do with the Resurgent class Star Destroyer that is part of the sequel era of Supremacy. Now, the first one here is that you can actually bake a pie on the Star Destroyer. Do not ask me why. I have no idea why this is in the game, but it is something you can actually do when you are on that Resurgent class Star Destroyer. And then another one that is really cool as well is that you can also find Matt the radar technician's uniform, which is a cool nod to Matt the radar technician. If you guys don't know who that is, there was, I believe, a Saturday Night Live skit that had pretty much Kylo Ren being an undercover boss. He dressed up as someone called Matt the radar technician, and yeah, it's just a bit of a skit that went around on SNL, but the fact that you can actually find this being ironed by a droid on that Star Destroyer, I thought that was a really cool touch from DICE as well. But that is it for 20 crazy details you might have missed in Star Wars Battlefront 2, guys. I'm sure there are plenty more things that I've completely forgotten to add to this video as well. So if you guys do want me to do a follow-up to this video, be sure to leave some other stuff that I missed down in the comment section. And if I get enough, I can always do a follow-up. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the Force be with you always.